So today we're going to continue to take a look at the alternative future of the world. We're now into part 8 of this series and it's doing quite well. There's going to be a pretty big event happening in this video, so please stick around to the end. And before we jump into the scenario, I'd like to ask you to please like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All the support is greatly appreciated as we try to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So yeah, let's get right into the scenario. So before we get into the first war, there's going to be a couple of unifications happening. Over here in Asia, if we look at the alliance map, we see this purple alliance here. If you remember, they're a super neutral alliance. They're not really allied to anybody but each other. And they're actually going to go ahead and fully unify into one country. So the new country looks something like this. And so now we can completely get rid of this purple alliance. This map will be updated for the next video, of course. So these countries are one country. Just remember that. And there's actually going to be one more unification before the first war. And that's going to be down here in Africa, where the East African Federation and this other country here, I forget what I called this one, they're going to be unifying together. So they're still going to be called the East African Federation, or maybe the Central African Federation. I don't know. I'm still going to call it the East African Federation, though. So the world is looking a lot more unified. Some regions, of course, are still pretty separated, as maybe they're forbidden from unifying, like in Europe, where Russia still controls more than half of the continent. But maybe a lot of the people here want to unify. Perhaps I'm foreshadowing something. Enough said, the first war of this video is actually going to be taking place now. We have Egypt declaring war on Arabia. Why, you might be asking? Well, if you remember, both these countries left the CSTO at the same time, but neither of them really like each other. Tensions have been very high in the Red Sea, and Egypt wants to take out the entire coast here, and so how to do that? They're going to do that by invading. Egypt is still allied with a lot of countries in the CSTO. One such country is Iran, who's actually going to be joining this war, as they want to connect up with their exclave. And Iran's going to call in their puppet of Syria into the war, just for some extra support. And so yeah, let's get right into the fighting. Right away, Egypt begins to move their troops down the coast, as, like I said, this is mainly what they want to target. They also make a landing in Yemen. And Arabia isn't a very strong country, so they're not going to be making very many gains in this war. Syria and Iran also begin to push out from the north. Their campaign goes quite well, as Iran continues to push towards their exclave, eventually meeting up with them. Arabia does, however, manage to push into southern Iran via their exclave, but they are very quickly pushed back, and a campaign is started into Saudi Arabia, or yes, just Arabia. Eventually, a large front line is established between Iran and their exclave, and continue to push the Arabian countryside. Egypt's front in the south eventually meets up with Iran's, and they fully connect up, and this forces Arabia into surrendering. Now let's take a look at this peace treaty. And now taking a look at this peace treaty, we see that Arabia still does exist, they're just landlocked now. Iran fully wraps around the eastern coast, and Egypt around the western. Syria managed to get a little bit of land, but not a very stable country as they're brand new. And so now, remember how I was talking about in Europe, how a lot of these CSTO countries are not happy with the CSTO, and they want to unite together, and they are kind of tired of communism and other like-minded governments. And so the countries that Russia doesn't have the greatest influence over declare their separation from the CSTO, and this leads into a large civil war. Every single member of the CSTO will be picking a side, so Russia and Iran are going to be major players on the red team, and then the countries in Europe that Russia keeps their greatest influence over, such as Ukraine and Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia, all join up on their side. Now, a lot of these countries don't have the support of their people. By this point, Ukraine probably does, as they're largely assimilated. We have China and Manchuria joining up on Russia's side. Same with their Japanese puppet. And we actually have Egypt and Syria joining the war on the red team. I know Egypt isn't in the CSTO, but they're closely allied with Iran, and so they actually back up the red team. And Turkey actually joins the blue team as well. We have South Africa joining the red team, but I mean, they're kind of far away, so I don't know how that will work. Then the Americas, the only countries joining the red team are going to be Venezuela, Cuba, and Central America. The rest will all join the blue team. The red team definitely overpowers the blue team, but the blue team does actually have some allies. These allies include Arabia, Afghanistan, the Central Asian country, which I forgot the name of, the Peru-Colombia country, and Florida, which you remember from the last video, all of this is Florida. So in the Americas, it kind of looks like the blue team's probably going to win. Over in Europe, it might be a different story. But they have more allies. Libya, Algeria, and Nigeria, which if we look at the alliance map, are in their own alliance. They left the CSTO in the last episode, I think, and they highly do not like them. And so in this war, they're actually going to be going up against them. Now the WDO, which is basically NATO if you don't remember, will be staying out of this war, as they don't want it to end up with another world war, which I think this probably does count as a world war, since there's countries from every continent, except for Oceania, which actually there is a country from, and that's actually going to be Indonesia. They're going to be joining the blue team, as they have very sour relations with China. Then there's Malaysia, who's very pro-Chinese in this alternate timeline, so they're actually going to be joining the red team. And there's Brunei, who somehow still exists, is actually going to be joining the blue team. So we'll see how that goes for them. But they don't like Malaysia, so they're going to be on the blue team. Probably not a very smart decision on their part, but yeah. So now we have all the sides set. Let's start the fighting. The fighting starts over here in Europe, of course, because that's kind of where everything started. We have the blue team pushing into eastern Germany and into Czechoslovakia. We also push into southern Ukraine, and Turkey manages to push into Russia, as well as down to Syria. The alliance makes a large campaign into Egypt, and this goes very well, as Egypt, while being a powerful country, is no match for the three of these countries. Meanwhile, Iran and Egypt still have their troops in Arabia, so they quickly take out this country. I don't even know why they joined this war. Probably just to try and get back at Iran and Egypt, but probably not a smart decision. China and Russia begin to move into this country here, and this country is not very strong. They just really despise the CSTO, so they join this war. But they very quickly capitulate over, as they don't have much of a military. And we have Malaysia taking out Brunei and begin to push into Indonesia. In the Americas, yeah, we don't need to talk about that. Over in Eastern Asia, a lot of people who aren't very happy with CSTO. In the Philippines, which is part of China now, there's actually a very large rebellion that takes place, and actually encompasses all of the Philippines. There's another one in southern Japan, and in South Korea, as well as in Taiwan. There's another group in Southeast Asia, and lots in Europe. Most of these are just armed civilians, but none of them are happy with the CSTO, and they quickly overpower the forces in these countries. And in Europe, they take out all of Ukraine and begin to push into Russia. They take over Crimea, and their campaign is going quite well. The African forces eventually take over Cairo and Alexandria, and the Suez Canal as well, and begin to push into Arabia, the Egypt portion of Arabia. They also begin to push down into Egypt, where Sudan is, and it's not going very well for them. South African forces finally do reach into Egypt, and so their campaign is slowly halted, and they're stalemated around Ethiopia. Iran and Russia attempt to push into Afghanistan, but it's very difficult to invade this country, so they don't do very well there. They do manage to take out their panhandle, though, and they push in a little bit from there. And Iran starts a campaign into Turkey. With South America's forces occupying these countries, they're able to send most of their troops over to fight in Africa and Asia, and Brazil and Argentina begin to make landings in South Africa. They make one landing up north, and another one near the central areas, and one very close to Cape Town, which is very heavily armed, and they make very large advancements, eventually cutting off the Cape from the rest of South Africa. South Africa is then forced to remove their troops from Egypt in order to protect their own country. With this, Algeria, Nigeria, and Libya are able to continue their massive campaign into Egypt. Eventually, they gain the support of the East African Federation, and they join this war on the side of the blue team, as they want to take back their old land that Egypt had taken from them in previous wars. So they begin to move up into Egypt and up the coast of Somalia, and they even launch a massive campaign into South Africa, going down to southern Mozambique and Zambia and Zimbabwe. It's really not looking good for South Africa now. Eventually, the country surrenders. With that front wiped out, they were able to focus their troops in on Egypt, which soon surrenders. This allows for the blue team to make a push into Arabia, liberating a lot of the country. Back over in Southeast Asia, Indonesia has fully liberated themselves, along with Brunei, as they've also taken out the area of Malaysia on the island of Borneo, and have started a campaign into mainland Malaysia, eventually taking out the country and meeting up with a rebel group in Thailand. From there, they pushed down into Southeast Asia, taking out a lot of region here. The people are definitely in support from separation from China. Elsewhere, groups in Japan do very well, as they retake the entire island, or a series of islands I should say. They don't have the same luck in South Korea though, as they are pushed back. Eventually, Russia and China decide they don't want to fight this war anymore, and they will come to peace with all these countries. Okay, and so taking a look at this peace treaty, we see that the world is quite different now. Starting over here in Europe where the war started, all of these countries are independent from the CSTO. Ukraine got a lot of their land back, and they even released Moldova and gave land back to Romania. East and West Germany have reunified, and Poland got a lot of land out of Russia. Unrelated to this peace treaty, we also saw the unification of Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and all these countries have joined the WTO. Turkey got a little bit of land out of Russia and a lot of land out of Syria, but they've decided to remain neutral. As you can see, they did not join any alliance. Arabia got all their land back before their war with Egypt and Iran, so Iran still has their exclave in southern Arabia, but Arabia did get some land out of Egypt. Libya got a bit of land out of Egypt, and the East African Federation got a ton of land out of Egypt. All of these countries have joined the Yellow Alliance. In South Africa, while South Africa is really just this tiny little country here, Mozambique is released, and this other southern African country, all three have joined the Yellow Alliance. Over in the Americas, Brazil and Colombia have installed a new government in Venezuela and have essentially split the country between the two countries. Colombia also annexed all of Panama, and the rest of Central America went over a FORDA, including Cuba. All of these countries formed a new alliance, which is kind of like the Rio Pact from the start of this series, if any of you remember. And then over to Asia, the Central Asian countries split between Russia and China. Afghanistan wasn't touched. Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines are all independent once again. Indonesia annexed all of Malaysia and Brunei. And then Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam are all independent countries. Most of these countries all decide to join the WTO. Indonesia is still neutral, however, but we'll see how long that lasts. And so yeah, that'll be the end of this video. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All support is greatly appreciated as we try to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Leave any comments or suggestions below. And I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.